Hello, dear readers. Welcome once again to an extraordinary literary journey. Today I'm going to tell a story that spans time and touches our souls, a narrative of love, dignity, and overcoming set in the frozen fjords of 19th century Norway. Imagine a young heiress who loses everything, but finds within herself a strength she never knew she possessed. A story where true worth lies not in titles, but in the character we forge in the face of adversity. Among lost castles, hidden identities, and a love that defies all social conventions, you will witness how destiny can be rewritten by our own hands. Before beginning this exciting journey, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What is your city? I love getting to know our readers scattered across this immense Brazil and around the world. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that loving like. It helps me so much to continue bringing these stories that warm the heart. Year 1866. Place Villa Nordfjell, Nordstrand Fjord region, Norway. The winter of 1866 arrived at Villa Nordfjell like an implacable judge, dressing the grey stone mansion with a white mantle that hid the earth's tears. The narrow windows of the ancestral Anderson property witnessed the last day of an era, while heavy flakes danced in the frozen air like fragments of shattered memories. Astrid Anderson stood motionless before the main hall window, her blue eyes like the Nordic sky reflecting the landscape that had always been hers. Delicate fingers traced invisible drawings on the fogged glass, each movement a silent farewell to the rooms that held her childhood, her dreams, her laughter lost in time's echo. The heavy fabric of her dark blue wool dress contrasted with the pallor of her skin, highlighting the blonde hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. There was a melancholic beauty about her, the kind born from pain accepted with dignity, from sadness that doesn't transform into bitterness. Behind her, the hall breathed history. Ancient tapestries hung from the walls like mute witnesses to generations of Andersons who had walked on those same Persian rugs, who had warmed themselves before the same carved stone fireplace. The portrait of her great-grandfather observed the scene with severe eyes, as if he knew this would be the last time his descendants would inhabit these rooms. Lars Anderson moved through the room like a ghost of himself. His hands, once firm and decisive in business, now trembled as he leafed through the documents scattered on the oak table. Each paper was a confession of failure, each signature a shovelful of earth on the grave of his pride. At 52 years old, the family patriarch had watched his commercial empire crumble like sandcastles before the implacable tide of hidden debts. Ingeborg, his wife, embroidered in silence near the fireplace. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, creating delicate flowers on the fabric as if she could, through art, keep alive the beauty being torn from their lives. The rhythmic sound of the needle piercing the linen was the only music in this anticipated wake of a life saying goodbye. Sigrid, Astrid's younger sister, tried to read a book, but her tears stained the pages. At 16, the young woman still didn't fully understand the magnitude of the tragedy, but felt in the air the weight of inevitable change, like animals sense storms before clouds form. The pendulum clock on the wall marked each second with cruel precision, reminding them that time forgives neither nobles nor ruined merchants. When the hands met at noon, a black carriage emerged on the winding path leading to the villa, cutting through the white landscape like a scar. Erik Nordahl stepped down from the carriage with the solemnity of one who carries destinies. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a penetrating gaze, he wore a dark overcoat that made him seem like an extension of the carriage itself. His dark brown hair was covered with snowflakes, and when he approached the villa's main door, his steps echoed in the silence like hammers on bronze. Astrid watched through the window the man who came to claim her world. There was something in his movements that suggested determination and at the same time a hint of reluctance, as if he himself regretted the necessity of this encounter. When their eyes met through the glass for a brief instant, she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The door opened and Erik entered, bringing with him the aroma of winter and the gravity of inadmissible business. Lars rose to receive him, and the handshake between the two men sealed the fate of an entire family. The documents were presented with respectful but implacable formality. "Villa Nordfjell now belongs to me," said Erik, his deep voice resonating through the rooms like a decree of destiny. "I regret the circumstances, Mr. Anderson, but business is business." There were no recriminations or public tears. The Anderson family maintained their dignity until the last moment, packing their lives in trunks and suitcases like one stores memories in drawers. Astrid was the last to leave the villa, turning back once to engrave in memory every detail of that facade that no longer belonged to her. The snow continued falling when the family departed for the small house in the village, and Astrid swore to herself that somehow she would find the way back. The new home. The house in the village was a cruel miniature of what they had lost. Low walls replaced the high ceilings of the villa. Small windows filtered scarce light where before enormous stained glass windows bathed the rooms in golden tones. The smell of old wood and dampness contrasted painfully with the aromas of beeswax and dried roses that perfumed the corridors of Villa Nordfjell. Astrid adapted to the new home with the same silent dignity with which she faced the loss. Her hands, accustomed to delicate embroidery and the pages of leather-bound books, now knew the rough texture of cleaning cloths and the hardness of homemade soap. She didn't lament aloud, but each gesture carried the weight of nostalgia. Weeks passed like dry leaves carried by the wind. The family struggled to rebuild a routine, but the villa's shadow loomed over them like clouds announcing a storm. Lars aged years each day, his hair whitening prematurely, his back curving under the weight of guilt. Ingeborg sold her jewels one by one, each transaction a small funeral of her former life. It was on a January morning, when the cold bit cheeks like invisible needles, that Astrid discovered the announcement. She was walking through the village market, her empty basket demonstrating the family's financial limitations, when a sheet of paper nailed to the central square post caught her attention. Maid sought for Villa Nordfjell. Requires discretion, efficiency and reading ability. Interested parties present themselves to Fru Larsen. The words danced before her eyes like evil fairies. Villa Nordfjell, her house, now home to another. The irony of fate was as sharp as the fjord breeze that swept the square. Astrid remained before the announcement for long minutes, her breath forming small vapor clouds that dissipated like hopes. The idea was born slowly in her mind, like plants that germinate under snow. It was absurd, dangerous, humiliating, and at the same time, it was her only opportunity to return to the place where she belonged, even if it was through the back door, even if it was to serve where she had once commanded. That night, while the family slept, Astrid remained awake before the small window of her room, watching the moon cut the sky like a silver sickle. The plan took shape in her mind, each detail being carefully considered. She would need a false name, a convincing story, a transformation that would hide her true identity. Anna Olsen. The name came to her like a whisper from the wind. Anna Olsen would be a young orphan from a distant village, educated enough to read, but humble enough not to arouse suspicion. Anna Olsen would have no aristocratic past, nor dreams of grandeur, only the honest need to work to survive. The following morning found Astrid before the mirror, studying her own reflection like an actress preparing a role. She gathered her hair more simply, chose her most modest dress, practiced a slightly hunched posture that suggested submission. But she couldn't completely erase the natural haughtiness of her lineage. It was imprinted in every fiber of her being, like a brand on cattle. The disguised return. The walk to Villa Nordfjell was a journey through time. Each step on the snow-covered path took her closer to home and paradoxically further from herself. The trees she had known since childhood whispered recognition, but Astrid forced herself to look at them as if seeing them for the first time. When the familiar silhouette of the villa emerged through the curtain of gently falling snow, Astrid's heart accelerated like runaway horses. There was her home, its pointed towers piercing the grey sky, its illuminated windows promising warmth and refuge. For a moment, she had the illusion that everything had been nothing more than a terrible nightmare, that at any moment she would wake up in her room, in her bed, in her life. But reality crystallized when she circled the mansion toward the servants' entrance. The back door, through which only employees had passed before, would now be her portal back. The irony wasn't lost. She was returning home for the first time in her life as a visitor. Fru Larsen answered the door with the military efficiency of one who commands a large house. A middle-aged woman, greyish hair gathered in a severe bun, eyes that seemed to catalogue defects with surgical precision. She examined the young woman who presented herself as Anna Olsen with the care of one choosing fruit at the market. "Can you read?" she asked without preamble. "Yes, ma'am," responded Astrid, modulating her voice to sound simpler than it was. "And write?" "Also, ma'am. References." Astrid had prepared a story about a distant family that couldn't be easily verified. Fru Larsen listened attentively, her eyes never leaving the candidate's face. There was something about the girl that she couldn't identify, an indefinable quality that differentiated her from the other maids she had interviewed. "You can begin tomorrow," she decided finally. "Salary of 15 crowns per month, lodging in the servants' quarters, 3 meals daily. Exemplary behavior is required. Mr. Nordahl tolerates neither familiarity nor negligence." Astrid nodded, swallowing the knot that had formed in her throat. 15 crowns, less than what she used to spend on a single dress. But it wasn't about money. It was about returning to the place where her heart had been buried under the snow of the cruelest winter of her life. When she left the villa that afternoon, Astrid looked back one last time. In a few hours she would be back, but she would be a completely different person. Anna Olsen would cross that door, leaving Astrid Anderson outside like a ghost haunting the past. The transformation was complete, but the price was yet to be calculated. For first days, as Anna Olsen Dawn arrived at Villa Nordfjell, carrying in the wind's arms the promise of a day that would change everything, though no one knew it yet. Astrid dressed as Anna Olsen for the first time, each piece of clothing another layer in her new identity. The simple grey dress, the immaculate white apron, the thick leather shoes, a uniform that made her invisible to the master's eyes, but that weighed on her shoulders like armor. Her steps resonated differently in the corridors she knew better than the palms of her hands. Where before she walked with the lightness of one who belongs, now she stepped carefully, like an intruder in familiar territory. Each painting on the wall, each porcelain vase, each tapestry, was a ghost of her former life whispering recognition. Fru Larsen assigned her the task of cleaning the main marble staircase. Those same stairs that Astrid had descended 1,000 times, dressed in silk and velvet, where she had posed for family portraits, where she had run in childhood chasing her sister Sigrid. Now kneeling on the cold steps, she scrubbed each vein of marble as if she could also erase the memories they held. The soap burned her delicate hands, unaccustomed to this type of work. Small bubbles formed in the water, bursting like fragile dreams. Astrid lost herself in the repetitive, hypnotic, almost meditative movement. This was how she would choose to survive. One day at a time, one staircase at a time, one memory at a time. It was then that footsteps resonated in the vestibule, heavy, determined, approaching with the regularity of a metronome. Astrid didn't raise her eyes, staying concentrated on her task, as Anna Olsen should do. But every fiber of her being was alert, recognizing without seeing that presence that modified the place's atmosphere. Erik Nordahl stopped on the first step. Astrid felt, rather than saw, the shadow that projected over her. Her fingers gripped the cloth more tightly, but she continued scrubbing the marble with precise movements. She could feel his eyes on her, a tangible weight that made her want to simultaneously flee and confront. "You're new here," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. The voice was deeper than Astrid remembered, loaded with a natural authority that echoed through the high walls. She slowly raised her eyes, prepared to encounter the face of the man who had taken her house. The world stopped. Erik Nordahl was different from what she had imagined during all those weeks of resentment. There was no cruelty in his features, nor the arrogance she expected to find in someone who had evicted a family from their ancestral home. His eyes were the color of the sea in a storm, and there was a depth in them that suggested unrevealed complexities. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it, an unconscious gesture that humanized him. "Yes, sir," she responded, modulating her voice to the respectful tone that Anna Olsen would use. "I began today." Erik observed her with growing attention. There was something about her that intrigued him, an indefinable quality he couldn't name. The posture, even while kneeling, suggested a dignity that wasn't common among maids. The way she held her head, the way her hands moved, everything about her communicated a refined education, poorly disguised by the uniform's simplicity. "What is your name?" he asked, stepping down another step. "Anna, sir." "Anna Olsen." She turned her eyes back to the staircase, but Erik didn't move. He remained there, studying her with the intensity of one trying to decipher an enigma. Astrid felt his presence like the heat of a nearby fire, disturbing and comforting at the same time. "Where do you come from, Anna?" The question came loaded with genuine curiosity. Astrid recited the story she had rehearsed, speaking of a distant village, of a family that no longer existed, of needs that brought her there. Each word was disguised truth, each phrase a careful camouflage of her reality. Eric nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. There was something familiar about this young woman, a sensation of déjà vu he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the color of her eyes, blue like summer fjords. Perhaps it was the curve of her neck, too elegant for a peasant. Perhaps it was simply the way the morning light filtered through the high windows, created a golden halo in her hair. "I hope you feel at home here," he said finally, and there was sincerity in his voice. Astrid almost laughed at the irony. Feel at home. She was at home, her stolen house, transformed into a golden prison, where she was simultaneously prisoner and intruder. But Anna Olsen only nodded with gratitude. "Thank you, sir." Eric remained a few more moments as if he wanted to say something more. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod of his head, he climbed the stairs. Astrid heard his footsteps fading down the upper corridors, but her heart continued beating irregularly for long minutes. When she finally stood to change the bucket water, she realized her legs were trembling slightly. The first encounter had been more disturbing than she had imagined. Eric Nordahl wasn't the villain she had created in her mind during sleepless nights. He was something much more dangerous. He was human, and there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, a spark of recognition, of interest, of something she couldn't name but that made her feel simultaneously exposed and curious. The secret librarian. 3 days passed like pages turned by gentle wind, each bringing Astrid deeper into her new identity. Anna Olsen had become a discreet but noticed presence at Villa Nordfjell. She worked with silent efficiency, kept away from gossip, and had about her an aura of mystery that intrigued both the other servants and the one who watched her from afar. Eric found himself doing exactly that with increasing frequency. Watching. He watched her when she polished the bronze handrails with movements too precise for peasant hands. He watched her when she arranged books in the library with the care of one who knows the value of each volume. He watched her mainly when she thought she was alone and her posture relaxed, revealing a natural elegance that no maid's uniform could disguise. It was Fru Larsen who brought the opportunity that would change everything. "Mrs. Ragnhild is impossible," declared the housekeeper during breakfast, addressing Eric with poorly contained exasperation. "She refuses to eat, doesn't want to be read to, screams at all the maids. She says we're all ignorant and that she'd rather die of boredom than hear one more line of cheap literature." Ragnhild Nordahl was Eric's aunt, a 68-year-old lady who had arrived at the villa 2 weeks earlier for an indefinite stay. Widow of a university professor from Oslo, she possessed a refined education and a temperament that made even the most experienced servants tremble. She had lost much of her vision due to age, and depended on others for the readings that were her only source of entertainment. "Perhaps Anna could try," Eric suggested, surprising himself with the quickness of the suggestion. Fru Larsen raised an eyebrow. "The new girl? Sir, your aunt dismisses maids with years of experience. What makes you think that—" "She seems different," Eric interrupted, unable to explain even to himself what he meant. "Perhaps a new approach is exactly what my aunt needs." And so it was that Astrid found herself, that same afternoon, before the door of what had been her favorite room for reading. The sunroom that faced the winter garden, with its burgundy velvet armchairs and wide windows that allowed generous entry of light. The familiar aroma of dried roses and beeswax flooded her nostrils like a homecoming embrace. Ragnhild Nordahl was seated in an armchair by the window, a wool shawl wrapping her thin shoulders. Her white hair was styled in an elegant bun, and although her blue eyes were clouded by age, there was a sharp intelligence in them that made her gaze penetrating. "So you're the new victim," she said without preamble when Astrid entered. "Did you come to bore me with stories of damsels in distress and charming princes?" "No, ma'am," Astrid responded, approaching carefully. "I came to read whatever you wish." Ragnhild studied her with renewed attention. There was something in the young woman's voice, a modulation, a pronunciation that suggested refined education. And the posture, even in the simple maid's uniform, she held herself erect with natural dignity. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, pointing to a book on the side table. Astrid approached and examined the volume. It was an edition of Henrik Wergeland's poems, bound in brown leather with golden letters. A book she knew well, for there was an identical copy in her father's library. Wergeland's poems, Mum. And can you read them properly? Or are you going to massacre the words like the others? I can try, Mum. Ragnhild gestured impatiently for her to sit in the nearby chair. Astrid opened the book to a random page and began to read. Her voice flowed naturally, bringing life to the poet's words, modulating intonations, pausing at the right moments. She didn't just read, she interpreted. As the verses filled the room, Ragnhild visibly relaxed. Her fingers, previously tense on the armchair arms, loosened. Her breathing became deeper, more rhythmic. When Astrid finished the first poem, the elderly lady remained silent for long moments. "Continue," she said finally. Astrid read for more than an hour, choosing poems she knew would touch the heart of an educated and sensitive woman. When she finally closed the book, Ragnhild was observing her with a thoughtful expression. "Where did you learn to read like that?" she asked. The question was loaded with suspicion and curiosity. Astrid had prepared an answer for this moment, a story about a village priest who had taught her about borrowed books and informal education. But before those blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should, the words died in her throat. "My father liked books," she said simply, offering a partial truth. "And what happened to him?" "He died, Mum." Technically, it wasn't a lie. The Lars Anderson, who had been a prosperous and respected merchant, had died the day he lost the villa. The man who now lived in the village was only a shadow of what he had been. Ragnhild nodded slowly. "Tomorrow I want you to read Ibsen. Peer Gynt. Can you find it in the library?" "Yes, Ma'am." "And girl." Ragnhild's voice stopped her as Astrid rose to leave. "What is your real name?" Astrid's heart raced like frightened horses. Her hands, which had been relaxedly folded in her lap, contracted instinctively. But something in the calm way Ragnhild had asked the question suggested there was no malice in her discovery. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, but her voice betrayed nervousness. "Astrid Anderson." The real name fell between them like a stone thrown into a still lake. "Elder daughter of Lars Anderson, heiress to Villa Nordfjell until December of last year." The world seemed to tilt around Astrid. She felt nausea rise in her throat, cold penetrate her bones despite the afternoon warmth. Years of care, months of meticulous farce, weeks of extreme caution, all crumbling with a simple phrase. "How?" The question died on her lips. "How did I discover?" Ragnhild smiled with surprising gentleness. "My dear, I may have lost much of my sight, but there are things that go beyond what eyes can see. Your posture, your way of speaking, your knowledge of this house's rooms, your education that shows through despite all efforts to hide it." Astrid remained motionless, unable to form an adequate response. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like an animal trapped in a snare. "But it was mainly this," continued Ragnhild, pointing to the nearby rosebed. "On the second day you were here, you casually mentioned that white roses bloomed better in the garden's east corner, information that only someone who lived in this house for years could possess. Are you going to tell Eric?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. "That's the decision you need to make." "Me?" Ragnhild turned to face her completely, and there was a gentleness in her clouded eyes that Astrid didn't expect. "My dear girl, my nephew is suffering. He's in love with someone he believes is unattainable, fighting against obstacles he imagines insurmountable. And you're here breaking your own heart to maintain a farce that has already served its purpose." "Its purpose?" "You returned home, didn't you? You found work, helped your family, proved to yourself that you could survive adversity." Ragnhild extended her hand and gently touched Astrid's arm. "But now you're trapped in a lie that prevents you from living." "I can't tell the truth." The words came loaded with despair. "He would hate me. He would know I deceived him, that I played the victim when I was the one lying." "Do you really believe that?" "I believe the truth would destroy any feeling he thinks he has for me." Ragnhild remained silent for long moments, studying Astrid's profile as she struggled to maintain composure. "May I tell a story?" she asked finally. Astrid nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I was young, I fell in love with an inappropriate man. He was a professor, I the daughter of a wealthy merchant. My family considered him socially inferior. He considered himself financially inferior. For 2 years, we danced around our feelings, each protecting the other from a truth we believed would be destructive. Ragnhild paused, lost in memories. "And what happened?" Astrid asked softly. "We almost lost each other through excessive protection. It was only when we decided to be completely honest, when we stopped deciding what the other could or couldn't bear, that we discovered true love is stronger than the obstacles we invent in our minds." "But did you marry?" "We lived 40 happy years together." Ragnhild's smile was luminous, "and all because we finally had the courage to trust in love instead of trusting in fear." Her words resonated in the garden's silence like distant bells. Astrid felt on the edge of a precipice, looking down at possibilities that were simultaneously terrifying and liberating. What if I tell and he can't forgive? Then you'll discover his love wasn't as strong as you imagined. Ragnhild rose slowly, leaning on her cane. "But if you don't tell, you'll never know if it was strong enough. I need time to think." "Of course. But don't delay too long, my dear." Ragnhild began to walk away, then stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Erik plans to travel to Bergen next week. There are rumors he's looking for a house there, considering moving completely away from the region." Astrid's heart raced. "Why?" "Because he believes his presence here is causing you suffering. Because he thinks distancing himself might free you from the impossible situation you find yourself in." Ragnhild smiled sadly. "My nephew is many things, but he's not selfish. If he believes he's harming you, he'll make any sacrifice to protect you." When Ragnhild disappeared down the garden path, Astrid remained alone among the blooming flowers. The perfume of roses mixed with the sweet aroma of the first spring flowers, creating an olfactory symphony that should be comforting, but only intensified her agitation. Erik was considering leaving, for her, to protect her from a situation he had created. The irony was almost unbearable. He was willing to sacrifice himself to free her from a dilemma she herself had created with her lies. For the first time since assuming Anna Olsen's identity, Astrid allowed herself to seriously consider the possibility of revealing the truth. She imagined the moment of confession, saw Erik discovering he had been in love with the very owner of the house he had taken. She tried to visualize his reaction: surprise, anger, disappointment, relief. But more than his reaction, she tried to imagine how it would feel to finally be seen for what she really was. No more Anna Olsen, humble and mysterious maid, but Astrid Anderson, woman who had lost everything and found ways to survive. The sun was setting when she finally rose from the bench, tinting the sky pink and gold. There was a decision taking shape in her mind, still fragile but gaining substance with each moment. Perhaps it was time to trust in love instead of trusting in fear. Perhaps it was time to discover if Erik Nordahl was the man she hoped he was. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for Anna Olsen to finally find Astrid Anderson. The great revelation. The decision came like dawn, slowly then suddenly, bathing everything in a light that made it impossible to pretend it was still night. Astrid woke the following morning, knowing with crystal clarity that she couldn't continue living in the farce she had created. The conversation with Ragnhild had planted a seed that germinated during the silent hours of dawn. Erik would leave for Bergen in 3 days. 3 days to find courage, 3 days to find the right words, 3 days to decide if she would risk everything in a confession that could destroy them both or liberate them. She spent the first 2 days observing him with new attention, trying to decipher in his gestures and expressions the man behind the social mask. She saw him in the gardens in the morning, walking alone among the flowers with a thoughtful aspect. She saw him in the library at night, reading without really processing the words. She saw him during meals, pushing food around his plate as if he had lost his appetite. There was a growing melancholy in him that broke her heart. Erik was preparing to leave, sacrificing his own happiness in a misguided attempt to protect her. The nobility of the gesture only made her own dishonesty more unbearable. On the morning of the 3rd day, when May's gentle rain created a delicate symphony against the villa's windows, Astrid made her final decision. She found Erik in the garden at 6 in the evening, exactly where she knew he would be. There was a ritual quality to his evening walks, as if he sought in the flowers and leaves answers he couldn't find in books or conversations. He was standing by the white rose bed she had inadvertently mentioned weeks before, those that bloomed better in the east corner. The irony of the location wasn't lost on her. Eric? She called him by his name deliberately, without formal titles. He turned, evident surprise in his features, when he saw her approaching. There was something different in her posture, in the way she walked, that put him immediately on alert. "Anna." His voice was careful, as if he feared the wrong words might make her flee again. "I need to talk to you." She stopped a few meters away, fighting the impulse to retreat. "About the truth." The interest in his eyes intensified immediately. "What truth?" "About who I really am." Eric remained absolutely motionless, as if any movement might break the moment's spell. There was cautious hope in his expression, mixed with fear of new disappointment. "Are you ready to tell me?" "I'm ready to risk everything." The words resonated between them, loaded with multiple meanings. Astrid breathed deeply, gathering courage to take the leap that would change everything. "My name isn't Anna Olsen," she began, her voice tremulous but determined. "It's Astrid, Astrid Anderson." Eric frowned, the name clearly familiar, but not yet completely processed. "Anderson, Villa Nordfjell was my house." The words came out in an avalanche, as if she needed to expel them before courage failed. "I grew up in these gardens, read in this library, slept in the rooms you now inhabit. This house was my home for 22 years. Understanding came gradually, like dawn. Astrid saw recognition being born in his eyes, followed by shock, confusion, and something that could be horror. "You are Lars Anderson's daughter." His voice came out as a rough whisper. "I am. The woman who lost everything when I took possession of the property." "Yes." Eric physically recoiled, as if he had received a blow. His expression went through a series of emotions: surprise, realization, guilt, something that seemed dangerously close to betrayal. "Why?" The question came loaded with pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to survive." Astrid forced herself to maintain eye contact, even seeing the pain in his eyes. "My family lost everything. We had no money, no options. When I saw the announcement for a maid, it was like an opportunity to return home, even if it was through the back doors. You deceived me." His voice was low, controlled, but there was raw emotion underneath. "For all these months you let me believe—" "I let myself believe too." Tears began to form in Astrid's eyes. "Initially it was just about work, about survival. But then you showed yourself different from what I expected." "Different how?" "Kind, complicated, human." She took a step toward him, but Eric instinctively moved away. "I came here hating you, blaming you for my family's ruin. But the more I got to know you, the harder it became to maintain that anger." Eric remained silent for long moments, processing the revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with bitter irony. "So you fell in love with the man who destroyed your life?" "I fell in love with the man who revealed himself much more complex than the life he destroyed. It's impossible." He ran his hands through his hair, gesturing with growing agitation. "How can there be genuine feelings built on fundamental lies? Because the feelings were born despite the lies, not because of them." Astrid felt tears begin to roll down her cheeks. "Eric, I didn't plan to feel what I feel. I didn't choose to fall in love with you. It happened despite all the reasons it shouldn't have. How can I trust anything you say now?" His voice broke slightly. "For months, I looked into your eyes and believed I was seeing truth. How do I know this isn't just another convenient lie?" The question cut deeper than any direct accusation. Astrid felt the weight of all the months of deception, all the moments of intimacy built on false foundation. "Because I'm risking everything to tell the truth now." Her voice was barely a whisper, but carried all the conviction she could muster. "Because I could have left with you never knowing, could have let you believe Anna Olsen simply wasn't brave enough to accept your love." Eric remained motionless, visibly struggling with conflicting emotions. The rain had intensified, creating a soft curtain around them, isolating them from the rest of the world. "Why tell me now? Why not before?" "Because I learned you were planning to leave. I learned you were willing to sacrifice your own happiness to protect me from a situation I myself had created." Astrid wiped the tears that continued falling. "I couldn't let you make that sacrifice based on a lie. So this is guilt? Obligation? This is love." The words came out with a force that surprised her. Real, terrifying, transformative love. The kind of love that makes me want to be better. braver, more honest. The kind of love that brought me here today, knowing I might lose you forever. Eric remained silent for so long that Astrid thought he would simply walk away without another word. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with emotional exhaustion. I need time to process this. I understand. Do you understand this changes everything? I understand it could change everything. Eric looked at her for more long moments, as if trying to memorize her features. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the villa, leaving her alone in the garden under the strengthening rain. Astrid remained there for a long time, the drops mixing with her tears, the cold penetrating her bones. She had finally told the truth, had released the secret she had carried for months. But instead of relief, she felt empty, as if she had lost something irreplaceable. Perhaps she really had lost it. 3 days of silence. 3 days passed like frozen eternity. 3 days during which Eric and Astrid existed in the same house like polite strangers, their paths carefully calculated to avoid encounters. She continued her activities, but now without Anna Olsen's mask, a freedom that paradoxically seemed heavier than the previous farce. Ragnhild observed everything with eagle eyes, her patience evaporating like dew under hot sun. "You two are the most stubborn young people I've met," she declared one afternoon when Astrid tried to read to her, but the words came out lifeless. "My nephew wanders around the house like a soul in torment. You're clearly miserable, and you're both too proud to take the first step." "He needs time," Astrid murmured, closing the book. "Nonsense. He needs certainty. And you need to give it to him." "How can I give certainty about something I don't completely understand myself?" Ragnhild leaned forward, her clouded eyes somehow finding Astrid's with disconcerting precision. "By explaining to him that you two are victims of the same circumstances, not enemies. That the love you share isn't built on guilt or gratitude, but on mutual recognition of similar souls." That night, Astrid made a decision that would have seemed impossible months before. She sent a message to her family, asking them to come to the villa the following day. It was time for all truths to come to light, for all masks to be definitively removed. It was time for Astrid Anderson to completely reclaim her life. The final confrontation. Eric received the Anderson family in his study the following afternoon. Astrid had prepared meticulously for this moment, wearing one of her old dresses she had managed to recover, dark blue like the night sky, with delicate lace that highlighted her natural pallor. When she descended the villa's main staircase for the first time as a lady, and not as a maid, she felt a strange transformation, as if she were returning to inhabit her own skin. Lars Anderson seemed to have aged decades in the months since they had lost the property. His hair was completely white, his back curved by the weight of shame. Ingeborg maintained her characteristic dignity, but there were new lines around her eyes that spoke of private tears and constant worries. Sigrid, now 17, had lost much of the youthful innocence that characterized her. Eric received them with careful courtesy, offering the most comfortable armchairs, tea, and sweets he knew they couldn't afford. There was gentleness in his gestures, but also an underlying tension that permeated the atmosphere. "Mr. Nordahl," Lars began, his voice carrying all the weight of a man forced to confront the consequences of his failures. "My daughter told us you discovered the situation." "I discovered that Anna Olsen and Astrid Anderson are the same person, yes." Eric kept his voice carefully neutral. "What I don't understand is how you allowed your daughter to subject herself to such humiliation." The implicit accusation made Lars visibly contract. "We didn't know. Astrid never told us what she was doing, where she was working. She said she was helping a distant family. Did you never ask why an educated young woman like your daughter would be working as a maid?" Lars struggled with the words. After losing everything, everyone in the family had to find ways to survive. There was no luxury of choosing dignified work. Eric rose abruptly, walking to the window that faced the gardens. "Do you understand that your daughter lived in the servants' quarters of the house where she had grown up? That she cleaned stairs she had descended as a child, arranged flowers for rooms where she had received visitors?" "We understand now." Ingeborg's voice was low but firm. "And we're devastated that our daughter felt forced to such measures. Devastated, but not enough to prevent." "Eric." Astrid spoke for the first time since the introductions, rising from her chair. "Please, they are not your enemies." He turned to look at her, and she saw confusion, anger, and something that seemed like pain in his eyes. "Then who are my enemies, Astrid? You, who deceived me for months. Myself, for taking your house. The world that created situations where such deceptions become necessary." "Perhaps," she said softly. "There are no enemies here. Only people who made choices they thought were necessary, and now need to live with the consequences." Eric remained motionless for long moments, as if he had received a physical blow. When he spoke again, his voice was loaded with pain. "I need to ask you something," Eric said finally, addressing Lars directly. "The debts that forced you to sell, were they really as desperate as you claimed?" Lars's face fell slightly. "Worse. I had been borrowing against the property for years, hiding the debt from my family. When the creditors finally called in their loans," he gestured despondently, "there was no choice but to sell quickly before everything was taken anyway. So you knew you were selling our family house to pay your gambling debts." Sigrid's voice was sharp with years of suppressed anger. "Sigrid!" Ingeborg's warning was crisp. "No, Mother. He should hear the truth. Father never told anyone he had been gambling, speculating on bad investments, living beyond our means for years. When everything collapsed, he made it seem like unfortunate circumstances, but the truth is he destroyed our lives through his own poor choices." The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Eric looked from Lars to Astrid, understanding dawning in his expression. "Did you know?" he asked Astrid. "I suspected, but it doesn't matter now." "It matters to me." Eric's voice intensified. "It matters because it means you weren't just a victim of circumstances beyond your control. You were cleaning up someone else's mess, protecting your family's dignity at the cost of your own." "Eric, no. Let me finish." He turned to face her completely. "You let me believe I was somehow responsible for your suffering. You let me carry guilt that belonged to someone else. Why?" Astrid felt tears threaten, but forced herself to maintain composure. "Because, in the end, it doesn't matter who caused the initial problem. The reality is, you ended up with our house, and I ended up working as your maid. The circumstances that led to that reality are less important than how we chose to respond to it. They're important to me. Why? Because," Eric's voice dropped to a whisper, "I need to know if your feelings for me are genuine or just the result of Stockholm Syndrome. I need to know if you can truly forgive me for taking your house, even if it wasn't entirely my fault." The question hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. Astrid realized this was the real issue, not her deception, but whether love could truly exist between them when their history was complicated by such fundamental inequality. "My feelings," she said carefully, "began as anger and resentment. They evolved to understanding, then admiration, then love. Not because you took our house, but despite that. Not because I felt grateful or dependent, but because you showed me kindness when you didn't need to, integrity when it cost you socially, and tenderness when I needed it most. And now, knowing what you know about your father's role in everything, now I understand that life is more complicated than victims and villains. Now I see that sometimes people make mistakes that hurt others, and sometimes people pay for mistakes that aren't entirely theirs. But mainly," she took a step closer to him, "I see that love isn't about perfect circumstances, but about choosing to care for someone despite the imperfect ones." Eric looked at her for long moments, and she could see him struggling with thoughts too complex for easy resolution. Finally, he turned to her family. "I think," he said slowly, "we all need time to process these revelations. Mr. Anderson, I appreciate your honesty, even if it came late. Mrs. Anderson, Miss Sigrid, you're always welcome here." He paused, looking directly at Astrid. "And you still need to decide what you want your life to be, now that all truths are on the table." A week of reflection. A week passed in tense silence, as if the entire villa held its breath awaiting resolution. Astrid had moved to one of the guest rooms on the main floor, no longer a maid, but not exactly mistress of the house either. She existed in a strange limbo, her true identity revealed, but her future completely uncertain. Eric maintained distance, but was polite. He greeted her at meals, included her in general conversations, treated her with respect he had never denied either the maid or the fallen heiress. But there was a watchful quality to his attention, as if he were studying her, trying to reconcile all the different versions of who she was. It was Ragnhild who finally forced the issue. "Enough," she declared one morning when she found Eric walking through the gardens with a particularly melancholic expression. "This house has become a tomb of dead emotions. You two need to talk properly, or one of you needs to leave." "There's nothing more to say, Aunt." "Nonsense, there's everything to say." Ragnhild pointed her cane toward the villa. "That young woman risked everything to be honest with you. The least you can do is be honest with her in return." "I was honest. You were careful. There's a difference." Ragnhild studied her nephew's profile with eyes that saw more than they should. "The question isn't whether you can forgive her for the lies. The question is whether you can forgive yourself for still loving her despite everything." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Eric stopped walking, his shoulders tensing visibly. "How can I build a future on such a foundation?" "The same way any couple builds a future, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one forgiveness at a time." Ragnhild touched his arm gently. "Dear nephew, love isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of commitment to solve problems together." Eric remained silent for long moments, considering his aunt's words. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with vulnerability he rarely showed. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if the differences between us are too great?" "Then you'll discover that by trying, not by avoiding." Ragnhild smiled with a tenderness that transformed her severe face. "But I suspect you're more alike than different. Both proud, both willing to sacrifice for family, both brave enough to love against all conventions." That afternoon, Eric sent a note to Astrid through a servant. "Meet me in the garden at sunset. We need to talk." Astrid read the words with a racing heart. The moment of final truth had arrived. She would discover if her feelings were reciprocated, or if she had lost Eric forever with her revelations. She dressed carefully, choosing a light green dress that highlighted her eyes, gathering her hair in a simple but elegant style. Not as Anna Olsen trying to impress the master, nor as Astrid Anderson trying to recover lost status, but simply as a woman who loved a man and hoped to be loved in return. She found Eric in the same place where she had made her confession weeks before, by the white rosebed that bloomed exuberantly under the afternoon's golden sun. He was dressed informally, without a jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a relaxed appearance that didn't match the evident tension in his posture. Astrid. He used her real name deliberately, and she felt a shiver of hope. "Eric." They remained there for moments, looking at each other across the small but significant distance that separated them. The air was perfumed with roses and spring's promises, creating a romantic atmosphere that contrasted with the seriousness of their expressions. "I've thought a lot about our last conversation," Eric began, "about everything that was revealed, all the complications our situation involves." Astrid nodded, not trusting her voice. "And I came to some conclusions I need to share with you." He took a step closer. "First, you don't owe me apologies for trying to survive the best way you knew how. Second, I don't owe you apologies for a legitimate business transaction that happened to be among the few options available to your family." "Eric, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "Third, what we feel for each other transcends the circumstances that brought us together. Fourth, I'm tired of letting guilt and social convention dictate my happiness." Astrid felt her breath catch in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. Not Anna Olsen, not Astrid Anderson as a lost heiress, but you, the brave woman who sacrificed herself for family, intelligent enough to navigate impossible situations, strong enough to confess difficult truths when it would have been easier to maintain comfortable lies." The words poured over her like a warm wave, dissolving months of fear and uncertainty. "Eric, I'm saying I want to spend my life with you, if you'll accept me." He moved closer, now close enough to touch. "Not as master and maid, not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals who choose to build something beautiful together." Tears began to form in Astrid's eyes, but these were tears of joy, not sadness. And social conventions? Society's disapproval? Let them disapprove. Eric smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen in weeks. "I've discovered my happiness is more important than their approval. And my family? The complications of our history. Your family is welcome in our life whenever they choose. The complications..." He reached out, gently touching her cheek. "Well, I think interesting love is always complicated. Easy love is tedious." Astrid laughed through her tears, leaning into his touch. Are you sure? Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. His voice dropped to an intimate whisper. The question is, are you sure? Can you love the man who took your house and transform it into our house? The question echoed all the doubts she had carried, all the fears about her own motivations. But looking into Eric's eyes, seeing sincerity and vulnerability there, Astrid found her answer. I can love the man who showed me kindness when I was broken, patience when I was difficult, and courage when I was afraid. She placed her hand over his, still touching her face. I can love the man who's willing to risk everything for love. Eric's smile was radiant. Then marry me, Astrid Anderson, not because you need protection or security, but because we belong together. Yes. The word came without hesitation, carrying all the hopes she had barely allowed herself to feel. Yes, Eric Nordahl. Marrying you would be my greatest joy. When he kissed her, there among the roses she had inadvertently mentioned so many months ago, Astrid felt as if she were finally coming home, not to a place, but to a person. The kiss was gentle but passionate, hesitant but sure, carrying promises of a future that would be built not on perfect circumstances, but on perfect commitment. When they separated, both breathless, Eric rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, my love. Thank you for bringing me home. And there in the garden where she had grown up, in the arms of the man she had learned to love, despite all the reasons not to love, Astrid finally understood that home wasn't about houses or inheritance or social position. Home was about finding someone who saw all your flaws and chose to love you anyway, someone who made you want to be better while accepting you exactly as you were. Villa Nordfjell had been her childhood home, but Eric's love was her true home, and she was finally ready to live in it fully. 2 years later, the complete flowering. 2 years later, on a golden June morning when the air carried the perfume of roses in full bloom, Astrid Nordahl, for she now bore the name she had chosen to take, walked through Villa Nordfjell's gardens with steps that echoed deep contentment. In her arms, her 3-month-old son slept peacefully, oblivious to the dramas that had preceded his arrival in the world. The marriage had taken place the following autumn in a small but elegant ceremony held in the villa's own gardens. Despite initial social disapproval, some respectable families attended, perhaps moved by the genuine devotion that was evident between the couple. Ragnhild had unofficially presided as family matriarch, her blessing lending solemnity to the occasion. The first months of marriage had been challenging, as Astrid had expected. The social boycott continued for some time, and Eric's business suffered significantly. There were moments when she questioned whether their love was truly worth the price others were being forced to pay, particularly when she saw the strain on Ingeborg's face during her mother's struggle to find work in a community that viewed her daughter as a social opportunist. But gradually, like seasons change, attitudes began to shift as well. Eric's integrity in business and Astrid's grace under pressure slowly won over some of the more reasonable critics. More importantly, they discovered that happiness built on genuine foundation was more sustainable than approval built on conformity. The turning point came when old Mr. Nielsen, the most respected businessman in the region, publicly declared that Eric Nordahl had shown more character in defending his principles than many men showed in a lifetime of conventional choices. True honor, he announced at a meeting where others could hear, isn't about following rules, but about being true to one's conscience. Slowly, carefully, social doors began to reopen. Business relationships were tentatively renewed. Dinner invitations appeared. The community seemed to realize the scandal had passed without destroying any foundation of civilization, and perhaps there were more important things to worry about than whom Eric Nordahl chose to love. Astrid found her place in this new life gradually. She wasn't exactly the lady of the manor her birth might have destined her to be, but neither was she the displaced person her circumstances had temporarily made her. Instead, she became something new, a woman who had earned her position through trials, who understood both privilege and hardship, who could relate to people across social divisions because she had lived on both sides of them. She used this unique perspective to benefit the community in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. Working with Eric, she established a fund for families facing financial crisis, ensuring no other daughter would need to disguise herself as a maid in her own home. She opened classes for young women, teaching reading and practical skills that could provide independence if circumstances demanded it. Lars Anderson had slowly recovered some dignity through steady work managing the accounts for Eric's restored businesses. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had lost everything through poor financial judgment now helped manage the finances of the man who had inadvertently benefited from his mistakes. But Eric valued his father-in-law's experience with failure almost as much as his experience with success. There were lessons in both. Sigrid had blossomed into a young lady of remarkable resilience. Having witnessed her sister's trials and triumphs, she developed a strength of character that attracted admiring attention from several suitable young men. She would never again take security for granted, but neither would she allow past hardships to limit her future possibilities. And Ingeborg had emerged from the trials with dignity intact and wisdom deepened. She served as unofficial counselor to Astrid in navigating the complexities of managing a large house and maintaining social relationships. Her experience with both prosperity and adversity made her advice invaluable. On this particular morning, as Astrid walked through the gardens where she had made her desperate confession so long ago, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of peace. The roses were blooming exuberantly, their perfume intoxicating in the warm air. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Eric's voice as he discussed business with visitors, the sound warm and confident. "You're thinking deeply this morning," came a familiar voice. Astrid turned to see Ragnhild approaching slowly, her steps careful but determined. The elderly lady had remained at Villa Nordfjell permanently after the marriage, claiming her nephew finally provided sufficiently interesting company to make the arrangement worthwhile. "Thinking about how everything is different now," Astrid responded, shifting her son to one arm to offer support to Ragnhild. "Different but not unrecognizable. You still have the same beautiful garden, though with different arrangements. You still have the same beautiful house, though with different inhabitants. You still have the same beautiful view of the fjord." Ragnhild settled carefully on a bench. "Sometimes when we think we've lost everything, we've actually just cleared space for something better to grow." Astrid considered her words, watching her son's peaceful face as he slept. "Do you think we made the right choices? Through all the difficulty, all the pain we caused others? I think you made brave choices. Right and wrong are luxury concerns for people who have easy options. You only had difficult options, and you chose those that honored your heart while accepting responsibility for the consequences." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the sun's warmth and the garden's beauty that had witnessed so much drama and joy. Finally, Astrid spoke again. "I used to think happiness was about recovering what you lost. Now I think it's about building something new with what you have." "Hard-won wisdom," Ragnhild agreed. "And speaking of wisdom, there's something I need to tell you before I become too old to remember properly." Astrid looked at her questioningly. "On the day you first came here as Anna Olsen, I knew immediately who you were. Not because of the roses or the way you carried yourself, but because you had your mother's eyes when she was young, and your grandmother's chin when she was determined. I recognized you because I was present when you were baptized as a baby, when your family entertained mine many years ago." Astrid stared at her. "You knew all along, from the beginning. And I never said anything because I wanted to see what you would choose to do with your freedom to reinvent yourself. I wanted to see if you would use desperation as an excuse for cruelty or as motivation for growth. And what did you see? I saw a young woman who protected her family's dignity at the cost of her own, who worked honestly instead of seeking revenge, who chose love over bitterness when both were equally available." Ragnhild smiled. "I saw exactly the kind of woman I hoped my nephew would be wise enough to marry." Astrid felt tears sting her eyes. "Why tell me now?" "Because your son should know when he's old enough that his mother was always brave enough to do what was necessary and generous enough to do it with grace." At that moment, Eric emerged from the house, his business concluded, and spotted them in the garden. His face lit up when he saw his wife and son, an expression of pure joy that never failed to warm Astrid's heart. He approached with the easy stride of a man content with his choices, his life, his love. "What are my two favorite ladies discussing so seriously?" he asked, settling beside Astrid and gently touching his son's small hand. "The past, present, and future," Ragnhild responded mysteriously. "And what conclusions did you reach?" That we were very fortunate, said Astrid, leaning into Eric's warmth. Not because everything was easy, but because everything was possible. Eric kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar perfume of her hair. I love you, Astrid Nordahl. And I love you, Eric Nordahl. As they sat together in the garden, their son sleeping peacefully between them and the wise lady watching over them all, Astrid felt the deep satisfaction of a completed journey. She had lost her childhood home only to find her true home. She had lost her identity only to discover who she really was. She had lost her security only to find real strength. Villa Nordfjell rose behind them, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun, its walls holding memories both bitter and sweet. But it was no longer just a house that had been lost and recovered. It was a home built on love, tested by adversity, and strengthened by choice. In the distance, the fjord stretched toward the horizon, its waters capturing light like scattered diamonds. Somewhere beyond that horizon were new adventures, new challenges, new possibilities for growth and joy. But for now, this moment was enough. This garden, this family, this love that had survived everything life could throw at it. Astrid closed her eyes and listened to the sounds around her. Her husband's steady breathing, her son's soft sighs, Ragnhild's contented murmur, the gentle buzzing of bees in the roses, the distant sound of waves against the shore. This was the music of happiness, not dramatic or overwhelming, but constant and true and lasting. When she opened her eyes again, Eric was watching her with the expression she had learned to treasure. Love mixed with admiration, passion tempered by deep understanding. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. I'm thinking, she said, that this is exactly where I belong. And as the sun continued its journey across the Norwegian sky, casting long shadows through the garden where two lives had been forever changed, Astrid Nordahl, former heiress, former maid, forever beloved, finally understood that sometimes the greatest losses lead to the greatest gains, and that love worth having is always love worth fighting for. In the years to come, she would tell her children the story of how their parents met and fell in love, despite all the reasons not to. She would teach them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action taken despite fear. She would show them that dignity can be maintained in any circumstances, and that home isn't a place but a feeling of belonging with people who see you clearly and choose to love you anyway. But today, in this perfect moment when the past had been reconciled and the future stretched bright ahead, she simply held her son close, leaned into her husband's strength, and allowed herself to be completely and absolutely happy. The story of Astrid and Eric would become legend in the district, a tale told to remind people that love can triumph over adversity, that honesty can overcome deception, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories emerge from the most difficult circumstances. Years later, when visitors came to Villa Nordfjell and asked about the beautiful roses that bloomed so magnificently in the garden's east corner, Astrid would smile and tell them that some flowers bloom better when they've been transplanted, when they've had to create new roots in soil that initially seemed foreign, but ended up proving more nourishing than what they knew before. Like love itself, these roses had thrived not despite the challenges they faced, but because of them.